but particularly at a young age, I can resonate closely to that. You feel pain like no other pain, and you know that in your life it's going to be very difficult.
The room was quiet when William was handed the envelope. There was no warning, no ceremony, only a sealed document carrying his mother's handwriting after years hidden from view. He stared at the name written across the front before slowly opening it. Inside was a message Diana had written for her two sons, a message apparently intended to reach them when they were old enough to understand what she feared was coming. But the letter had never been delivered. Someone had made that decision decades earlier. Now, with the document finally uncovered, William was about to read words his mother believed could change everything between him and Harry. The discovery. The envelope was heavier than William expected. Not because of the paper, but because of what it represented. For years, the palace had treated Diana's private words as something that required protection. Now the same protection looked very different from where he was standing. The document had been catalogued, sealed, reviewed, and forgotten by people whose names were recorded in the archive. The first question was no longer why the letter had been hidden. It was why nobody had ever decided that the hiding should end. William asked to see the original archive record. The archivist placed it in front of him and explained that the file contained every known movement of the envelope. There were dates, signatures, classifications, and brief notes from officials who had handled it. The earliest entry was dated weeks after Diana's death. The letter had been marked for delayed delivery, meaning someone had already decided that William and Harry should not receive it immediately. At first, the reasoning appeared understandable. Both boys were still grieving. Their mother's death had placed them under extraordinary public pressure, and advisors feared that a deeply personal message could create another emotional burden. But the record became harder to defend as the years passed. The restriction remained in place when William became an adult. It remained when Harry left school. It remained when both brothers began building lives of their own. Each review produced almost the same result. The document remained restricted. No new explanation was required. No new evidence was added. One official simply relied on the decision of another, and the next relied on the one before them. William read the notes slowly. One phrase appeared more than once: family circumstances. The wording was deliberately broad. It allowed the restriction to continue without identifying a specific event that would trigger release. There was no deadline. No scheduled review date. No instruction saying who would ultimately make the decision. That detail disturbed him more than anything else. A decision without an ending could become permanent without anyone ever admitting that permanence had been chosen. He asked who had authorized the original restriction. The archivist hesitated before explaining that the record pointed toward a small group of senior officials involved in managing private royal correspondence at the time. The names were familiar to William. Some belonged to people who had served the family for years. Others had already disappeared from public life. William looked again at the envelope. His mother's handwriting had survived untouched while the people who had controlled access to it changed around it. Then he opened the letter. The first page was unmistakably Diana. Her handwriting moved across the paper in long, uneven lines, with small corrections where she had stopped and reconsidered a thought. The opening was not dramatic. It was personal. She told her sons that she was writing because she wanted them to remember who they were before the world told them who they had to become. William read the sentence twice. For the first time, the archive did not feel like a room filled with records. It felt like a room holding a conversation that had been interrupted for decades. Diana's message did not ask William to reject the monarchy. It did not ask Harry to abandon his responsibilities. Instead, it focused on something more difficult: the space between duty and family. She warned William that institutions could teach people to call emotional distance maturity. She wanted him to understand that restraint could sometimes protect a relationship, but it could also quietly destroy one. Then she wrote about Harry. Her words were gentler, but the warning was just as direct. She understood that Harry might experience the world differently from his older brother. She did not want him ashamed of that difference. But she also cautioned him against allowing hurt to become an identity he could never escape. One passage stopped William completely. Diana asked her sons to be careful about believing stories they had been told about each other. She knew that resentment could grow in the empty spaces between conversations. When brothers stopped speaking directly, other people could begin explaining one brother to the other. That was the danger she wanted them to recognize. William lowered the pages. He thought about the years between himself and Harry. The letter did not erase any of those things. Instead, it forced him to look at them without the comfort of distance. The final page contained a sentence addressed to both sons. Diana wanted them to make decisions about each other themselves. She did not want advisors, officials, friends, spouses, journalists, or institutions to become the permanent translators of their relationship. William reached the end and remained silent. Then he returned to the archive record. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Diana had written about the danger of allowing other people to control the distance between her sons. The palace had then kept the letter away from both of them for years. Whether that had been intentional manipulation or simply institutional caution, the effect was the same. William asked for the names connected to the later reviews. The record showed that the restriction had been renewed several times. Some reviews were brief. Others contained only a few lines. There was no evidence that either brother had ever been consulted. No evidence that anyone had asked whether they were old enough to receive the letter. No evidence that Diana's instruction had been reconsidered. The document had become part of an administrative system that no longer remembered why it existed. A system could preserve a mistake simply because correcting it required someone to accept responsibility. William closed the file. He knew he could demand an investigation. He could ask the palace to explain every decision. He could insist that the archive records be examined by independent officials. But there was another question. Harry. If Diana had written the message for both of them, William could not decide what happened next without him. He picked up his phone. For years, communication between the brothers had been surrounded by intermediaries. This time, William wanted none of them. He called Harry directly. The call was answered after several rings. Neither brother spoke for a moment. William finally said that something belonging to their mother had been found. Harry asked what it was. William told him the truth. A letter. A letter Diana had written for both of them. And it had been hidden since 1997. Harry did not respond immediately. The silence on the call was different from the silences they had known before. This one contained surprise, suspicion, grief, and something neither brother was ready to name. Harry wanted to know why he had not been told sooner. William explained that he had only learned of the document after it was recovered and that he had refused to make assumptions about its contents. Harry asked who had known. William described the archive record and the repeated restrictions. He told him that officials had reviewed the document over the years but had never delivered it. That answer created a second silence. Harry had spent years believing that important decisions about his family were made without him. Now he was learning that something written by his mother had literally been kept behind a door he never knew existed. He asked William to read the letter. William said he would rather they read it together. For a moment, Harry said nothing. Then he agreed. The brothers arranged a private meeting away from cameras, advisors, and official schedules. There was no ceremony and no announcement. William brought the original document. Harry brought an old handwritten note from Diana that he had kept among his personal belongings. When they sat down, neither brother knew what to expect. William began reading. The words sounded different aloud. Diana's message was no longer an artifact inside an archive. It became a conversation between two sons who had spent years trying to understand what had happened to their family. She reminded them that grief could make people protective of their pain. She warned them not to confuse protection with isolation. Most importantly, she asked them to speak to each other before accepting someone else's explanation of what the other brother felt. Harry listened without interrupting. When William finished the main letter, Harry placed his own note beside it. The handwriting matched. It was shorter, written for him when he was young, but its meaning connected directly to the longer message. Diana had understood that the brothers would eventually face different versions of the same pressure. She wanted them to remember that their relationship existed before their titles, before public expectations, and before the arguments that would later define them. The discovery did not magically repair everything. There were still years of hurt between them. There were things each brother believed the other had done wrong. There were memories they would never interpret in exactly the same way. But for the first time in years, they were discussing those memories without an audience. William then asked the question that had been waiting since the archive was opened. Who had decided that Diana's letter should remain hidden? They agreed that the answer mattered. Not because they wanted revenge, but because an institution could not learn from a decision it refused to examine. The archive review was expanded. Additional records were requested. Officials were asked to explain why the restriction had been renewed and why no formal delivery review had taken place after the brothers became adults. The answers were complicated. Some officials believed they had been protecting the family. Others admitted that later generations had simply inherited an old classification. No single document proved that one person had designed a decades-long plan to keep the brothers apart. And that may have been the most unsettling part. The separation did not require one mastermind. It required only a decision that was never properly revisited. William understood that now. Harry understood it too. And as they sat with their mother's words between them, the archive finally stopped being a place where Diana's voice had been stored. It became the place where her sons heard it together. The letter did not end the distance between William and Harry overnight. It gave them something they had been missing for years, a conversation that belonged to them alone. The archive investigation continued, and officials were forced to explain why Diana's message had remained restricted long after the original circumstances had passed. No single person could be blamed for every year it stayed hidden. The decision had survived because one official trusted the previous decision, and another trusted the one before it. But for William and Harry, the explanation mattered less than what they chose to do next. They kept Diana's message private, protecting the words she had written specifically for them. Their relationship remained complicated, but something had changed. They were no longer allowing other people to define what their mother's final message meant. Diana had feared that distance could grow quietly between her sons. Decades later, her words finally gave them a chance to confront that distance themselves. And perhaps that was the real legacy of the letter. Not what it revealed about the palace, but what it reminded two brothers they still shared. Like this video if you want more royal deep dives and subscribe to our channel so you never miss what happens next.